Welcome to Education 101 with your host, Eric Wolfram. Education 101 is about the amazing education community we have in the greater Spokane area. We highlight the outstanding programs, teachers, supporters, and opportunities of the education community in the Spokane region. Education 101 is brought to you in part by STCU. Here's Eric.
And welcome to Education 101. I'm your host, Eric Wolfram. Today we're going to be talking about working in the classroom with students that have type 1 diabetes. And so to talk with me about this today, we have Michelle Grove. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Eric.
And Michelle is the science coordinator up at the ESD, so go ESD.
Yes.
But then at the same time, the other piece, the other hat, one of the other hats that you wear is you're a parent of a student or a child that has type 1 diabetes, and you've done a lot of advocacy work as well.
Yes, I have.
Excellent. Yeah, so you know a lot about this. And we've had a lot of these conversations, and it's always interesting to hear some of those accommodations that really need to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an important conversation to start to talk about the fact that we need to build awareness in the education community that we need to be thoughtful about the kids with type 1, right?
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. And this time of year, back to school, so exciting for everyone. And it takes a lot of preparation for any family to get kids back to school.
Right.
But when you add the complication of a child with a chronic illness like type 1 diabetes, suddenly for that family, for that student, for that classroom and that school, that takes on a whole new meaning. It's a different level of preparation.
It's got to be.
So that these kids can be safe and healthy, and then just get down to the business of learning and being kids.
Doing the things that they're supposed to do when they're in school, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So talk to us a little bit about, I guess, your story. You know, because
Right.
you not only do you just live it every day, but you've done some advocacy work as well,
Right.
specifically in the education world. So talk to us a little bit about maybe that advocacy work or your story.
All right. Well, my daughter was diagnosed 7 years ago. She is 14 now, so it was half her life ago. And
Wow.
the prospect of getting her back to school was daunting.
Sure.
There were so many things that at that point we didn't even know that she was going to need. But really, we were so relieved to know that she was at a school that was familiar with type 1 diabetes and even had a classroom teacher that was familiar. And
That's great.
those things eased it quite a bit. But over the years, we've had to really do a lot of work advocating for her, and then that's led me also to some bigger advocacy work. This year, I was so proud to help OSPI and the Department of Health to re-author the guidelines for caring for students with type 1 in schools.
Yeah.
And that was long overdue.
Right. That's a great deal. That's a great deal because not only, so OSPI would be at the state level.
Right.
Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Yes.
But then I know you got to do some national work as well, right?
I did.
So not just this piece, but talk to me about that.
All right.
Then we'll come back.
Exactly.
So,
Well, the Washington guidelines are tools for Washington schools,
Okay.
obviously, that
Okay.
are written to comply with our Washington laws and also best practices. But from that work also has stemmed some national work with the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta,
Right.
partnering with the National Association of School Nurses. And because of my work with OSPI, I was asked to come and be part of a national focus group as they work on toolkits for schools, working
Right.
with all students with chronic illness, not just diabetes, with asthma, with life-threatening allergies, with complicated health conditions, so even broader.
really, so beyond just the type 1.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Exactly. That's great. So Sophie's your daughter, right?
Yes.
Sophie at 7.
Yes.
And she's diagnosed. From a parent's point of view,
Yes.
let's talk about from a parent's point of view, because my
Right.
curiosity, I got to be honest, I don't know a lot about it.
Right.
How did you know? I mean, were there signs or anything? I mean, I think about, as a dad, are there things I should be watching for?
Right, absolutely. And honestly, even as a classroom teacher, I now
Yeah.
know things I should have been looking for in my students
Right.
that might have been worrisome. Honestly, I taught high school biology. I taught anatomy and physiology. I missed it all. I missed every sign. Everything was something we could explain. She was a little headachy. But
Really?
she'd walked into a pole on the playground, and
Sure.
she was a little grumpy. But second grade is hard.
Yeah.
She was really
Yeah, second
thirsty.
grade.
Oh, I know. She was
Yeah.
really thirsty, but she was hydrating. We teach kids to fill their water bottles and to
Yeah.
hydrate. And we didn't realize that she was filling that water bottle, that quart-sized bottle, 4 or 5 times a day.
Wow.
That's not normal consumption for
Yeah.
a 7-year-old body.
Not for a 7-year-old. Yeah.
No,
That's
no,
a lot.
exactly. And to still be thirsty after that. Along with that comes increased trips to the restroom,
Sure.
which made sense because of the water.
Well, yeah, drinking that much water.
Exactly. Fruity breath, it turns out, is one of
Fruity
the sort of
breath.
most alarming symptoms.
Really?
She was a kid who liked her gum. She
Uh-huh.
liked to chew fruity gum. And I realized the day I ended up taking her to the doctor that I was smelling something like that, but she swore we were out of gum.
Huh.
And that was, it turns out, a huge red flag. And
Really?
one of the last symptoms, had we not taken her in
Mm-hmm.
that day, which at that point, things were just sort of adding up to something that didn't make sense. Her skin was
Yeah.
really dry, but it was December in Spokane.
Sure, exactly.
But it was one too many things.
Yeah.
So we took her in just to the pediatrician
Mm-hmm.
and said, send me home. I'm sure I'm crazy, but something's up.
Yeah.
And it
Something's that gut instinct of something going on.
Exactly.
And so I think I think what you said before, it's interesting, and to build that awareness piece,
Right.
not just as a parent, but
Right.
then as an educator as well. We're trained to look for other things as also.
Exactly.
Why are we not trained to be able to look at some of these health issues,
Right.
and even just ask questions or start conversations with
Absolutely.
the parents at home to say, I've noticed.
Right.
So thinking about the standards, is that the right way to say it, standards that were written, is that part of them, the whole awareness, I guess?
It's not, actually.
Okay.
It is really just caring for the already diagnosed student.
Okay.
Which is why our family spends a lot of time doing advocacy work.
Okay.
We work with Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which is a research organization working on prevention and early diagnosis and other science-based therapies, and the American Diabetes Association. A lot of these places work on advocacy, and sort of one of the biggest pushes right now is simply the idea that to diagnose this, all it took was 1 drop of blood.
Oh boy.
1 drop.
That's it.
That's it. We went into the pediatrician's office, and 10 minutes later, we had a definitive diagnosis.
Huh. That's amazing.
It really is.
And then just that little tiny bit to be able to test it and
Right.
see what it takes. But,
Absolutely.
But it also takes, I guess, knowing those symptoms and
Right.
thinking about that, having conversations and being able to say, I better take my child to the pediatrician to be
Right.
able to see what's going on. And again, that gut instinct. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then from there, the work goes to getting them back to school, getting
Mm-hmm.
them healthy again, getting them into a safe school environment so that they can
Right.
learn, so they can compete in sports and participate in clubs and be a
Right.
part of everything they were part of before.
Sure. And you mentioned that when you guys went back to school, you had people there that were familiar
Right.
with type 1 diabetes.
Yes.
And not just with type 1, but maybe with accommodations. Is that the right word for
It is.
students with?
It is.
And that's really where the standards come into play. Is that correct? Of
Absolutely.
being able to say,
And-
here's best practice. You use best
Yes.
practice as well.
Exactly. And it's not just state standards. It's actually type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition
Okay.
and actually qualifies as a disability under Section 504 law.
Very nice.
And so the students actually qualify for a specially written plan for themselves that covers things like being able to test in class and to eat when they
Yeah.
need to, which seems like a simple thing, but it's hard for some classroom teachers or some schools to know what's appropriate.
Right.
When is a kid just wanting a snack, and when is a child in a potentially life-threatening situation if they
That's
don't
the
have
scary
access?
thing.
So the 504 law and 504 plans, along with those state standards, really help a school and a family figure out what appropriate accommodations would be for a student
Absolutely.
based on their age, their stage in their diagnosis, all those things.
Right. One of the things you mentioned, the whole idea of testing, and I think that's fascinating because it should be such a, I guess, such a common thing to be able to say, yeah.
Absolutely.
But then you talked about, where you guys are today and ACT, SAT testing,
Right.
those kinds of, once you get into high school, those high school testing pieces, that there's a lot of work that kind of goes into the prep of that for those accommodations.
Absolutely. A lot of people take that for granted that, well, of course someone would just, let her eat or check if she needed to
Right.
in the middle of the PSAT. But that's not actually true. They have very strict rules about things like having a bag,
That's amazing.
having any electronics. And she wears 2 electronic medical devices that
Right.
require her phone to transmit.
Uh-huh.
And so the devices themselves and even her iPhone
And the
are
phone.
part of her care. And so we actually spent 6 months working with
That's amazing.
College Board, working with her doctor
Yeah.
and her school counselor to get the appropriate accommodations so that she can have food, she can have water, her devices, whatever
Yeah.
she needs. She can pause a test if she's not feeling well from a low blood sugar
Right.
and not be penalized.
And and again, it's amazing. You are in the education world.
Right.
You're in the education world, and so so you have some idea around this whole piece of what's going on, and maybe how to do this too, but know that there are accommodations. I can't imagine someone who's not in that world to be able to say,
Right.
how do I do that? And I think that's where the advocacy piece comes back into play, to say,
Exactly.
as a school system, how do we make sure that these modifications are there?
Exactly.
So the kids can get, this, be able to test and be able to use the things that they need to have there.
Right.
Right.
And it changes as they get older. And I said going into high school is a completely different set of accommodations than when she
Sure.
was 7.
I bet. I bet.
So, and I feel like our family was uniquely positioned with the resources. My background in education, our science backgrounds, to understand enough of it that, along with the steep learning that we did after she was
Right.
diagnosed, that it puts us in a place to be able to help other families and teachers in schools. I spend a lot of time talking with school nurses, talking
Sure.
with school staff members about the ways that they can accommodate these kids and and the other 32 kids in their classroom, and
Yeah.
still really meet the needs of every child.
Right.
that they've got in there.
Yeah, including those kids, and being able to kind of look at those
Mm-hmm.
best practices. And I think that's a piece that I do want to kind of get into a little bit, is
Sure.
let's talk about kind of how does it affect me? What can I take, since school is just starting up? It's that
Yes.
time of year. What are some of those things from a teacher's point of view that
Right.
I would be able to take into my classroom as I'm setting up my classroom, or
Right.
I'm in first couple days, and be able to set that up. So I tell you what, let's take a quick break.
All right.
And then let's come back. And so we'll take a quick break and come back and continue the conversation about supporting kids with type 1 diabetes.
They say it takes a community to raise a family. It also takes one to build a business. I came to Spokane 12 years ago as a Whitworth student, and I planned to leave after graduation. But the more I got to know this community, the more I wanted to become a part of it. My husband and I have built our business in Spokane, and now we're raising our family here too. We operate a consulting company that provides creative business development strategies. Our approach is holistic and dependent on intentional connections and relationships. And no one understands connections and relationships better than GSI. They direct momentum towards investments in our community, provide resources that help business leaders connect, and they're dedicated and passionate about making Spokane great. GSI gives me the confidence to build my business here because they believe every organization, even a small one like mine, adds big value to our community. With GSI's help, Spokane will be a place my son will want to build his career too. I'm Eva Marquette, owner of Freshview. We're creating something greater with Greater Spokane Incorporated.
Hi, this is Kurt Stockwell with Well Dressed Walrus. We are a local website design and development company here in Spokane. What we do is build beautiful, usable websites for local businesses. A website needs to be beautiful, it needs to be usable for your users, your customers, and yourself. Contact us anytime. We'd love to talk with you about your online marketing.
What? You haven't been to the library lately? Stop in today and see that the library is more than books. Spokane County Library District facilities feature on-site technology, including Wi-Fi, computers, and printers, as well as free use of meeting rooms. The Library District offers events and programs for all ages, from story times to career development and employer classes to Social Security workshops. Our staff is well trained and happy to help. Find out more about your library at scld.org.
And welcome back to Education 101 with Michelle Grove talking about type 1 diabetes and how we support those students from an education point of view, but I also think from just a community and a family point of view as well. So before we left, we were starting to talk a little bit about some of those best practices. It's beginning of school again. And so what are some of the things that teachers need to do? What are some of those things they might need to have in their classroom or be thinking about? Because really, whether it's a 504 plan, whether it's which by the way are so important to make sure that you're involved with from a teacher's point of view, teachers out there, is that because you need to be able to accommodate for these kids.
Right.
But what are some of the things that as they plan out into the school year that they should be thinking about?
Right. You know, a big piece of it, just like anything, is communication. Communicating with the families, trying to figure out what is going to help that student, especially if they're newly diagnosed or younger.
Sure.
But truly at any age, you know, we always say there's no great age to be a type 1 diabetic. They're all different.
Yeah. I know.
So,
yeah.
you know, they all require different things. Little things, though, even like considering your procedures for a lockdown.
True.
Even students who primarily go to the office to treat lows and eat in the lunchroom, imagine if they're suddenly stuck in your classroom for a few hours.
Right.
In this day and age, it's something that
it's a realistic thing.
Exactly. Unfortunately, even a lockdown drill can be very stressful for a child. And then imagine that child also would have to consider if they have access to their life-saving medical devices and equipment and food and water and those sorts of things. So that's something
so with that, you know, so anxiety goes along with that. Does, again, not knowing a lot, does that affect the levels, with sugar levels?
Absolutely. Blood sugar, blood glucose, is affected by about 1,000,003 things. It turns out,
sure.
you know, the human body is very complicated.
Yes.
Pancreas is highly underrated as an organ, but it turns out that everything can affect it. The weather, the temperature in a room. If someone's excited, if someone's sad, if they're fidgety, that kind of excitement might drop blood sugar. If there's adrenaline, that might raise blood sugar.
Okay.
So a lot of times in a lockdown type situation, you might end up with a student who has high blood sugar. But when my daughter was little, stress and anxiety dropped her low. And so in that case, she needed to have access to food and sugar in the classroom because she couldn't just walk down the hall to the office in that case and access it. So,
you know, if you look at being stuck for you know, we're not talking about a drill. We're talking about the real deal.
Right.
And you might be in there a couple hours.
Absolutely.
You know, and you mentioned something a while back to me about high blood pressure, high sugar levels versus low and the severity between the two.
Absolutely.
And again, thinking about being stuck for a couple hours.
Right. And in general, we hear about the effects of high blood sugar. Every time my daughter runs into someone who learns she has diabetes, we hear a lot of my grandpa had diabetes, and this happened to her feet, and which is there can be some long-term effects of high blood sugar, and it can be very damaging to the organs, to the capillaries. But in the short term, over the course of a few hours, the bigger risk is a low blood sugar.
Is low.
Because in any situation, a low blood sugar is an urgent situation, and it can become an emergency very quickly. And in worst case scenario, a student could even lose consciousness, have a seizure. It could be a lethal event, which would be absolute worst case. But with some management, with some monitoring, with
Planning.
some good planning, the
Yeah.
likelihood of preventing that goes way up.
Right.
And so even my high school daughter is taking quart-sized Ziploc bags to all 6 of her teachers to just throw in a desk drawer.
Yeah.
In case that's the day that her teenage brain forgets her bag.
Sure.
And,
sure. And
you
I
know,
think that's a great plan. And that's what I was going to ask next. I was
Right.
saying, number one, with good communication with the family,
Right.
which is your number one step. But what are some of those things that might be in my top drawer for those kids that I have
Right.
in my class?
Right. Well, with a low blood sugar, any sort of fast-acting sugar is going to
What's
be
that
great.
mean?
So, for example, my daughter uses a lot of glucose tablets, which are sort of like a
Okay.
giant Smartie, and she prefers those. But even Smarties
Okay.
or honey. Or tubes of frosting, or anything
Sure.
that would be quickly absorbed by the body. Juice
Okay.
is great. An apple juice is a fabulous
heard of
way
that
to bring
one,
up
yeah.
a blood sugar. She doesn't prefer it. She's an athlete and runs around a lot. Doesn't
Sure.
like sloshing, so
see that,
she prefers
yeah.
the solids.
I can see it,
But essentially anything quick. People think chocolate. Chocolate actually has a lot of fat and protein and doesn't raise blood sugar as quickly as you would think.
Interesting.
Eventually it will.
Yeah.
But not as
Yeah.
quickly as when you're talking about needing something that acts in 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, right away.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
Right.
Huh.
So those sorts of things are, in a pinch. And again, that's something to communicate with a family and say, in an emergency, what would you want me to
Right.
have here that would be okay for your student and
Absolutely.
that would be a good fit?
And with that too, is that something that I would imagine the nursing staff at the school should be involved with as well in
Right.
that conversation?
Theoretically,
I'm
yes.
hoping.
No, absolutely, with their healthcare plans.
Yes.
So a lot of students have to have doctor's orders.
Okay.
And then from that, usually the school has a healthcare plan for the student. And then those are shared with teachers. They should be shared with substitute teachers and things.
Yeah, that's another one too. that gets me.
Yeah, I always, as a parent, would leave a sheet for the teacher and ask them to please share my student's information with a little picture and just
Right.
sort of a quick, hey, here are the highlights, things to look for and,
Yeah.
and things to not be concerned about. If she pulls out her phone, she's probably texting me about a blood sugar, but feel free to ask her what's up.
Sure,
So
sure.
those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Even going into high school, we're having to make sure we, let everybody be aware of that. And
Well, and I would imagine even once you get going from elementary where self-contained
right.
versus even middle school,
Oh, yes.
going to different teachers,
Right.
that was a big learning experience along the way for you guys.
Absolutely, absolutely. Being able to carry a bag with her because she self-carries all of her supplies and medications and
Yeah.
things, and her school didn't allow bags.
Sure.
So it was really simple. They said, well, let's write it into her 504 plan,
Yeah.
and then it's not a problem. So those were the kinds of things, as an educator, we sort of were
Yeah.
able to work out.
And essentially, so from a teacher's point of view, thinking about my class load that I
Right.
have,
Right.
there should be health plans
Right.
in the office. There should be 504 plans. Maybe not 504 plans yet,
Right.
but there should be a health plan, which means the family is communicated with the nurse.
Yes.
It's there. And that would be how I would essentially look into finding out if any of my students have this that
Exactly.
I need to work with.
Exactly.
Right.
And honestly, kids with type 1 diabetes are probably going to be able to do anything the rest of your students can do.
I would think so.
They can have treats, they can go on field trips, they
Okay.
can play sports, but a lot of times it takes a tremendous amount of pre-planning and behind the scenes effort, which
Yes.
to let these kids just be kids. And so
Yeah.
that's something, if someone lets me know the day before a field trip, I might not be able to get off work to go.
Yeah.
And when she was younger, her school didn't have someone who could go with her. And so that got really tricky. And so we
Yeah.
had to make sure that we had a lot of planning time, a lot of lead time on things like that.
Right.
Even parties with treats, which I know are becoming few and far between anymore.
right.
If we
Yes.
knew about it, we could manage it. If it showed up randomly at the age of 8,
Yeah.
she just had to sit it out, and that was pretty painful.
And that's a tough thing you talked about being a kid, and that's really
Right.
what we should be able to do is
Exactly.
these kids should be kids.
Exactly.
And
That
be in school
inclusivity.
and-
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big deal.
I know there are some other resources, and I know you advocate and work with families a lot as
Right.
well. Is there a way, if somebody's listening and wants to find out more about resources, that they can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What would that be?
Well, first of all, they can find me at the ESD.
Yes,
So,
that's right.
Definitely. There also are a lot of just local organizations. The JDRF, which is the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation.
Okay.
The local pediatric endocrinology office at Sacred Heart.
Okay.
They connect me with people who are looking
They
for
do as
resources.
well?
They do.
Okay.
And again, the ADA, the American Diabetes Association.
Okay.
But again, just even connecting with me directly, I work with, and Camp Sticks, which is
Yes.
Sticks Diabetes Programs, that's
It's a great
STIX,
program.
yes,
Yes.
is a camp here locally for children with type 1 diabetes to be able to go to a week of summer camp safely and go be kids. And so that's
Right.
another organization. So if you reached out to any of those organizations, they probably know me.
I was going to say they'd be able to get you back, and I know you're
Yes.
connected with other families and
Yes.
so on, and so.
Absolutely.
So, if they wanted to get directly to you, we can go through the ESD at
Right.
mgrove@esd101.net.
Yes.
And that would be a great way to do it. But it sounds like as well, if somebody's working with that, I would say if educators wanted to find out some more about it too.
Absolutely.
Any of those organizations would be a great place to start.
They do.
And then be able to
They
even
do
get a
have.
hold of you as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
And a lot of those organizations have toolkits for getting kids back to school,
Great.
resources for families, and safe at school programs
Mm-hmm.
where they educate. They even offer a training to allow non-medical personnel to give the rescue injection that could potentially be necessary in
right.
a severe emergency, sort
Sure.
of the diabetic equivalent of an EpiPen.
Yeah.
But
see
Washington
it.
law does allow a layperson to be trained to do that.
If
And-
they're trained.
Exactly.
Great.
Sophie has 6 staff members at LC getting trained this fall.
I like
so
it.
Very exciting.
I like it. That's great. Well, that's a big conversation. Again, we get back to school time here, and I think the biggest things are communication and planning.
Absolutely.
Communicate with the right people, communicate with the nurses, administration, definitely with the families to be able to kind of make a plan, because that's
Absolutely.
gonna allow all of our kids to be able to be kids
Right.
and enjoy school, which is
Absolutely.
what they should. Michelle, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great information. Hopefully we can catch you next time on Education 101.
Education 101 is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Education 101 is brought to you by our friends at STCU. Ask Eric a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com.